So if the Afrikaners don't actually like the land, they can leave that country.
They are. They're leaving to come here.
No, they can
these
leave
refugees
and go,
are coming here.
They can actually leave and go to where their native land is.
The message is that there is literally no place on earth that white people can claim as a legitimate homeland. A white man is native to nowhere. He is indigenous to nowhere. Try to imagine that you run South Africa. You're in charge of the African National Congress, not exactly an enviable position. Your country has the highest unemployment rate in the entire world since the end of apartheid, which was supposedly the greatest evil to ever befall mankind. A lot of bad things have been happening. The power grid has collapsed along with the export markets and any semblance of public safety. Headlines like this one are common. As you can see, it reads, grandmother 71 dies of shock after she was forced to watch her 3 granddaughters being raped at gunpoint at her home in South Africa. And there's plenty more where that came from because you have turned your country into the living embodiment of DEI to disastrous results. And then, to your horror, the President of the United States decides to shine an international spotlight on your incompetence. He makes it impossible to hide what's going on in South Africa. Specifically, the president allows white citizens of South Africa to flee to the U.S., so they can escape all the anti-white violence and race-based land seizures that you've implemented in your failing country. And unsurprisingly, a lot of white people take the United States up on the offer. They decide that it's better to uproot their entire families and fly halfway across the world than to spend another second under your rule in South Africa. Now, if you have an ounce of shame, that would have to be extremely monumentally embarrassing. I mean, there are politicians in Japan who would quite literally commit like ritualistic suicide under those circumstances. The job of any government is to look after the well-being of its own people. And once the most productive members of society start leaving at great personal cost to themselves, then you have failed as a leader and as a government. You are illegitimate and you have no one else to blame. And you should resign in shame at the absolute minimum. But the African National Congress has decided on the opposite course of action. Rather than engage in any kind of introspection, they decided to attack the white refugees who have just fled to America. They're not showing any interest in keeping any of the remaining Afrikaners from fleeing, even though they're responsible for maintaining the vast majority of usable farmland in the country. They're also not interested in contesting the notion that white people are going to be persecuted in their country. Instead, the African National Congress released this statement the other day. As you can see, the statement reads, quote, they flee not from persecution, but from justice, equality, and accountability for historic privilege. The statement goes on to describe the refugees as cowardly and says that they are offended by a democratic society working to redress past injustices. Then there's this concluding line, which really sells the message. Quote, ours is not a broken or failing state. It's a people's democracy advancing against the tides of distortion and destructive, divisive narratives, close quote. Well, this is one of those, those things that's less true for having been said, as the saying goes. If you're running a highly functional, stable country, then you're not going to end your press release out of nowhere by declaring that you're not a broken or failing state. No state that isn't a failing state has ever had to clarify in a statement that they aren't a failing state. And it's like walking up to your wife unprompted and announcing that you're not having an affair. But none of these people are especially bright, so they're not aware of the implications of what they're saying, no matter how obvious those implications might be. It also explains why, in effect, their message is essentially an explicit threat to every white person in South Africa. And they're also attempting to coax the refugees back with a promise of giving them the opportunity to be held accountable for historical injustices. They're basically saying, hey guys, can you come back so we can persecute you? This isn't fair. We were going to persecute you and then you left. That's not fair. Now, with this statement, they are validating everything the Trump administration says about the country. No person of any race should be subjected to land seizures or violence as part of accountability for historic privilege, whatever the heck that means. But that's what the government of South Africa is now demanding by their own admission. And it's what the political left is demanding in this country, too. In the days since the first 59 white refugees arrived from South Africa, political commentators on the left have been melting down to a degree that's truly hard to comprehend, even given everything we already know about these people. What we're seeing is primal rage and hysteria. I mean, it's a level of anti-white race hatred that needs to be exposed, or else very soon, we're going to start to look a lot like South Africa. So let's start with Don Lemon, who no longer has the need to temper his passion for a white genocide now that he's not on cable news. Not that cable news personalities are tempering it very much, as we'll see later on. But anyway, here's Don Lemon.
This South African farmer
which is the most blatantly obvious racist ever. It is blatantly obvious the way that we treat white South Africans, who, by the way, for the most part, and I am generalizing here, some of the wealthiest people are well-to-do people in the country. They speak their language. They're not just taking land away from white South African farmers. White South Africans, about 9% of the population, owned 87% of the fertile land. Okay? Today, Black South Africans make up more than 90% of the population, and they only hold about 4% of all privately owned land. So what they're trying to do is say, hey, we need to fix an historical injustice and figure out if you're not using that land to farm, then we need to have some of that land, not taking all of your entire farm. That's not what's happening. And we need to what? There needs to be equity. And now people are crying because the playing field is being leveled. And so therefore it is now discrimination.
Okay, so notice what is being said here. Notice he says that white people own most of the fertile land in South Africa. The word fertile is doing a lot of work there because if you know anything about farmland, even if you don't know anything about it, you should still know that it's possible to ruin it. I mean, it's possible to do a very bad job of maintaining it. And it's not as though you could just give a farm to a random person off the street and rest assured that it's going to be fertile in 10 years. And we know that for a few reasons. First of all, it's common sense. Second, Zimbabwe already tried this. Several decades ago, they made the decision to seize farms from whites, give them to black citizens. After all, what could go wrong? Well, Zimbabwe was the breadbasket of Africa, supposedly. Well, as it turns out, a lot can go wrong. Like a whole lot. And before long, Zimbabwe needed to import food because they couldn't make their own. And eventually the government gave up on the idea. They gave the farmland back to the white people. This is a Bloomberg News article from a few years ago. Quote, Zimbabwe gives land back to white farmers after wrecking economy. 2 decades after President Robert Mugabe wrecked Zimbabwe's economy by urging black subsistence farmers to violently force white commercial farmers and their workers off the land, his successor has thrown in the towel. The seizures that began in 2000 were ratified by the government, which said they were needed to redress colonial imbalances. A vibrant agricultural industry that exported tobacco and roses and grew most of the food the nation needed collapsed. Periodic food shortages ensued, inflation became the world's highest, and the manufacturing industry was decimated. What was one of Africa's richest countries became one of its poorest, close quote. Okay, so in other words, it turns out that when you use the government to redistribute fertile farmland to correct some alleged injustice, what you get is famine. Okay, that's what equity means in practice. It's what always happens when you take land from people who are managing it properly and redistribute it on the basis of race. Competence matters, especially when you're talking about a country's food supply. And make no mistake, the reason those white people control the farmland in South Africa is because historically they're competent. They bought it. They maintained it for generations. Nobody handed it to them or maintained it for them. The fact that it's still fertile, again, you can ruin farmland. It's still fertile, even by Don Lemon's own testimony. It's still fertile after generations. What does that mean? It means that they are properly managing the land. And in many cases, they were there long before black South Africans arrived and demanded their property. Now, in this debate, we are well past the point where the left can scream apartheid and just get whatever they want. Post-apartheid South Africa is simply too great of a disaster by every available metric. And by the way, apartheid was nothing like what's currently being enacted in South Africa. As we discussed the other day, there were far fewer race-based laws under apartheid than there are right now in South Africa. And the race-based laws under apartheid, by and large, were directed at enforcing racial separation, not large-scale farm seizures by the government without any limiting principle whatsoever. Tax day may have passed, but for millions of Americans, the real trouble is just beginning. If you missed the April 15th deadline or you still owe back taxes, the IRS is ramping up enforcement. Every day you wait only makes things worse. With over 5,000 new tax liens filed daily and tools like property seizures, bank levies, and wage garnishments, the IRS is applying pressure at levels we haven't seen in years. Increased administrative scrutiny means collections are moving fast. The good news, well, there's still time for Tax Network USA to help. Are you self-employed or a business owner? Even if your books are a mess, they've got it all covered. Tax Network USA specializes in cleaning up financial chaos and getting you back on track fast. Even after the deadline, it's not too late to regain control. Your consultation is completely free, and acting now can stop penalties, threatening letters, and surprise levies before they escalate. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Walsh. You may have missed April 15th, but you haven't run out of options. Let Tax Network USA help before the IRS makes the next move. Activists on the left know they have the losing argument in this debate, which is why they're now resorting to some of the most pathetic tactics imaginable. So the New Republic, for instance, just ran a story in which they dug up the old tweets of one of these white refugees. And we'll get to the bombshell, and let's see if you notice the big problem with this line of attack. Maybe you'll pick up on it. So the headline is, one of Trump's Afrikaner refugees is quite the anti-Semite. So yeah, they went rooting through his tweets to smear him, all because he's white and he's fleeing persecution in South Africa. He's allegedly an anti-Semite, so he needs to go back. Now, of course, if this is the new standard for refugees, then, I have very bad news about like 90% or more of the refugees that were admitted under the Biden administration. Muslims from the Middle East and Africa are not exactly big fans of Jewish people, generally speaking, okay? Even if a lot of them don't have Twitter, so you can't go look at it. It doesn't take long if you want to know how they feel on that subject. Wouldn't take much digging to find out. But the New Republic probably doesn't seem to realize how this would go, but it's pretty obvious. Meanwhile, other luminaries on the left are reduced to making explicit threats against these refugees, and here's one viral example. Watch.
Good morning. This is for the South Africans who are going to be entering the United States. This is just a public service announcement. I just wanted to make you aware that the Black people who were students during apartheid, we're grandmas and grandpas now, and we have the ear of Gen Z. One more thing. I also want to let you know that our president, he has Secret Service. And you will not. I also want to tell you that Black people over here are empowered. These are just public service announcements. When you get here, sit your ass down and don't touch nothing. Because you don't have Secret Service. Okay. Now have the day you deserve.
Now, this is not some random person, by the way. She has more than 100,000 followers on TikTok for some ungodly reason. And she's openly threatening these white refugees with murder solely on the basis of their skin color, which, by the way, is something you just never see. For all the talk about the anti-immigrant rhetoric on the right, there's nobody on the right going out and just threatening to kill immigrants who are coming here. We might say, we're saying round them up, deport them if they're not here, if they shouldn't be here, enforce our immigration, enforce our laws. There's nobody saying that. There's nothing like this is happening. All it takes is for a few white people to be admitted, and this is the kind of anti-refugee, anti-immigrant rhetoric we get from the left. It's immediately all pretense is dropped, and they're saying, yeah, we're going to go out and kill you. There's not even any attempt to sugarcoat it. She thinks that white people should die. And there are a lot of videos like this on TikTok at the moment. Most of them adopt the same gleeful tone. We saw this with the Carmelo Anthony. We saw it with Rodney Hinton. And now we're seeing it here. And if you listen really carefully, by the way, the most telling part of the video happens around the 31-second mark. Maybe go back and listen to it again. Turn the volume up. That's the moment where you can hear a very faint smoke alarm chirp in the background while this woman is threatening to murder white people. So, the whole thing is just very on the nose. Actually, there is one exception here. Over at CNN, they've managed to fix the smoke detectors at least, but they definitely have not gotten rid of the genocidal anti-white commentators. So this again is on CNN. This is not on TikTok. And listen to what this woman says.
The people who are native to that land deserve their rightful land back. That is not what the Afrikaners actually want to have happen, which are the white Africans. And so who are not originally from Africa who colonized South Africa also. And so that is what they are saying is discrimination. Now, if the Constitution in South Africa is discriminatory, they have their checks and balances in that land just like we do. And that is for them to. So if the Afrikaners don't actually like the land, they can leave that country.
They are. They're leaving to come here.
No, they can
These
leave
refugees
and go,
are coming here.
They can actually leave and go to where their native land is, which is probably Germany.
Are you
or
against them coming here?
Holland, probably.
Holland.
Now, the obvious problem here is that despite being given a national television platform, this woman clearly has no idea what she's talking about. She thinks the Afrikaners came from Germany. She's a complete imbecile, like pretty much everyone else on CNN. All she's interested in doing is demonizing white people, and she's going to do that one way or another every time she gets on television. But there's actually a bigger problem with this woman's response. I mean, let's pretend for a second that the Afrikaners actually did come from Germany. She's implying that in that scenario, the white people could go back there and she'd be fine with that. But of course, she wouldn't be fine with that. The left would not be fine with that. Take a look at what the left has done to Germany in the last couple of decades. If you don't believe that, I mean, it's unrecognizable. And any white person who complains is immediately labeled far right. They're condemned as white supremacists. The National Security Service has opened counter-terrorist investigations in every single one of them. And the same is true, of course, in this country. So this is the funny thing about who is considered native or not, who is considered an invader or not. CNN commentators have no problem announcing that white people whose ancestors have been in the country for 20 generations should go back home if they're in South Africa. But try telling the Somalis in Minnesota to go back home. You'll be immediately labeled a far-right bigot. Even though the Somalis have been here for at most a couple of decades. Some have been here for a couple of hours. But we're told that the Somalis have every right to be here. That we're told the Somalis, the moment they step foot here, they are just as American as anyone else. The moment the Somali steps foot in this country, they're just as American as you, even if your family's been here for 400 years. And yet the white South Africans are not South African even after 400 years. And Americans who can trace their lineage back several centuries, they just have to shut up and take it in this country. No matter where they are, maybe you've noticed white people, no matter where they are always the colonizers and have no legitimate claim to whatever land they're on. In other words, under the left's framework, white people are the only demographic on the planet that can never be considered truly at home or native to any country anywhere. You know, we'll be told that a white person's true home is Western Europe. And yet, if any white person in the UK claimed that it was a white country, they'd be condemned. You know, they say to us in America that this isn't our land, right? It's stolen. So where is our land? They will not follow that to its conclusion and say that, well, Europe is the white man's land. They're not going to say that. So where is it? The message is that there is literally no place on earth that white people can claim as a legitimate homeland. A white man is native to nowhere. He is indigenous to nowhere. I mean, that's strange, isn't it? How does that work? Like, have you noticed that there's no country on the planet with white indigenous people? How is that possible? Where did the white people come from? Did they fall out of the sky like rain? Did they magically spawn out of thin air? If a white person could trace his roots back to the 17th century in this country, does that make him a Native American? I mean, at what point can the white person say, yeah, I am native to this country? How many centuries does he need to be? Does his family need to be in a country to be native to it? How many generations? 10? Is that enough? No. 15, 20, 25, 30, 40? Is that enough? At that point, can we say we're native to this country? And if the answer is, well, there's no amount of time, if the answer is that, well, it could be 1,000 years from now, and a white person who's been here for more than 1,000 years, their family's been here for 1,000 years, still is not native to this country in America. If that's the answer, then again, where is his native homeland? And if he goes there, can he claim the title of native or indigenous? Can he say that the non-natives are invading or stealing? Well, the left has no answer to any of those questions. And the reason is that the terms native and colonizer and invader and indigenous are all just tools of manipulation. They don't mean anything. And of course, white people get this treatment even though they actually bring innovation, advancement, and infrastructure everywhere they go. and then when they're kicked out, what happens? I mean, very often that infrastructure is not maintained. Look at what happened after Portugal gave back Mozambique or Angola. Look at South Africa. Look at Zimbabwe. Total disrepair has followed when the alleged colonizers are kicked out. And that's just a historical fact. And why might that be? Well, that's a question you're definitely not supposed to ask. But recently I saw someone who's an African who took a crack at addressing this point. It's interesting. Let's watch.
What is the one word in Igbo for maintenance?
Maintenance is there's no direct English word for that. It doesn't translate directly to maintenance.
That's correct. How about you?
It doesn't translate.
That's correct.
But it translates to like take care of.
No, that's not maintenance. What is the one word for repair in Igbo?
Imezie.
Exactly. What is the one word for repair in You see? I'm driving you to somewhere. What is the one word for democracy in Igbo language? You don't. How about you? You don't. You're trying to practice something that is not in the concept of the language. There is no African country, and I've done it through Kenya, I've done it all, that has an equivalent of the word maintenance.
Well, in order to maintain something, you have to have it first, correct?
No, if I leave it for you, you can maintain it. The British left a lot of things in this country when they left. They established the hospitals, they established the fire station, the post offices, the railway lines, the roads they built before they left. You are not able to maintain it because you don't have that concept. Because your environment, the tropical environment of Africa, the way you build your houses, the material you use, you don't require maintenance. Every country that is called industrialized countries, today, one of the things you know about them is maintenance of what they have. That's why we have buildings here that are about 250 years old, 300 years old in this country. There are buildings in other countries of Europe that are 700 years ago. The Notre Dame that burned in France was a 13th century building. Do you know what kept it that long till today? Maintenance is a culture.
Now, this is one of those conversations that if you were leading South Africa at the moment, you'd probably want to take pretty seriously. Maybe you take a step back and wonder if 30 years of black supremacy and white hatred is really an optimal substitute for maintaining the roads and the farms and the power grid. Maybe you'd recognize that if you don't even value the concept of maintenance, then inevitably you're going to have a collapse. That's what inevitably will happen. And it's pretty clear in South Africa that they don't value maintenance at all, which is why they are taking the people who've maintained fertile farmland that everyone recognizes as fertile and expelling them from it without any real plan of how are we going to make food now. So this is what happens if you demonize a handful of productive people who are sticking around. But of course, no one in South Africa is asking these questions at the moment. Instead, they're demonizing the white people who are already out the door. And that means that very soon, those white people will have a lot of company. I mean, South Africa is about to lose the few farmers it has left. No country in human history has ever survived something like that. And South Africa, the ultimate embodiment of DEI, will be no different. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.